This is the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast, Episode 12. The Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast is a bi-weekly podcast dedicated to the world of scuba diving, ocean health, sustainability, and fostering a new generation of ocean stewards through diving education. Welcome, everyone, to this latest episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Cincerpino, founder and president of the Scuba Educational Alliance of Connecticut. Well, I hope you are surviving this crazy weather this winter. We have certainly had our share of cold and wintry weather here in Connecticut this month. Fortunately, we're missing that storm to the south today, and it's looking like we're going to get a little bit of a thaw this weekend. Spring is just around the corner. So that was a very big win for the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl. I have to tell you that I was very surprised at how dominant the Eagles were against the Chiefs. I can remember the first time we made it to the Super Bowl in 1980 and how bad it felt when we lost to the Raiders. And now we are on top, at least until September and the new season starts. Well, there is a lot going on in the world today and a lot that has to do with the transition to the new administration. It has only been a month, but it feels like a whole lot longer. It is a 4-year marathon, and if anyone tells you they know how things are going to turn out, I'd be a little leery because things change rapidly. One of the things that will probably change, or maybe be scrapped, is the United States' National Plastic Strategy, which was finalized in November 2024. So, for today's feature, I want to take a look back at that. But up first is C-State for some news and information updates. This is C-State here on the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast for Thursday, February 20th, 2025. Well, we're only 3 weeks away from the Boston Sea Rovers 71st International Ocean Symposium. The show has several elements, including 2 full days of daytime seminars, 3 days of various workshops, an exhibit hall, and the premier event, the Saturday Night Film Festival. Tickets are on sale now for the show, and you can customize your package by selecting the days and the events that you want to attend. You can even register for various workshops on the website. The exhibit floor is going to be packed, and you can see who's going to the show on the website as well. For us here in New England, the Boston Sea Rovers show is really the way we get geared up for the upcoming dive season. So be sure to grab your ticket ahead of time, and if you want to say hi to me, I'll be chairing one of the seminar rooms on Saturday morning. I'll be in the Cousteau room featuring marine science and technology. So I'll see you in Danvers, Massachusetts, March 15th and 16th. And while I'm talking about scuba shows, I did want to let you know that there is another show up here in the Northeast in March. That is the Beneath the Sea Dive, Travel, and Ocean Exposition. Beneath the Sea runs Friday, March 28th through Sunday, March 30th, 2025. The show is at the Meadowlands Exposition Center in Secaucus, New Jersey. Now, this show was at one time one of the biggest consumer shows in the United States for scuba. COVID really hit it hard, and it was postponed for 3 years before making its comeback in 2023. Now, it takes a long time to recover from 3 years. Anyway, the tickets are now on sale, and if you're interested in a single-day pass for the exhibit hall and seminars, that runs $35. If you want to go to both Saturday and Sunday night, the cost is $60. They also have a Diver of the Year reception and banquet on Saturday night, March 29th, and that runs $130 plus tax. So if you can't make it to Danvers, Mass. For Sea Rovers, then maybe you can make it to Beneath the Sea. Heck, why not just do both? I happened upon a podcast from NOAA recently. Not exactly sure how I landed on it, but when you poke around online long enough, you're bound to find almost anything. The podcast is titled Planet NOAA Podcast, and it's only been around for about a year. The first episode was released on February 7th, 2024. The podcast is introduced by stating, From delivering America its daily weather forecast to unlocking the secrets of the deepest depths of the ocean, NOAA's impact is felt from sea to sea and everywhere in between. The original trailer indicated that they would be doing episodes every month. Now, there were 10 episodes last year, and the first episode of 2025 was released on February 5th. Most episodes are 45 to 60 minutes long and feature scientific trivia, up close with cool science, and one-on-one conversations. Episode 11 is a close-up look on corals. Now, I don't know if the podcast will continue with all the changes happening in Washington and some talk about cutting NOAA's budget. We need to see how the new administrator, Dr. Neil Jacobs, handles things. Many of us have concerns. Time will need to play out on this. There was an article in the Maine Morning Star on January 31st by Anne-Marie Hilton. The headline, Appeals Court Reinstates Lobster Fishing Limits to Preserve Right Whales. Now, I've talked at length regarding the plight of the North Atlantic right whale. This is a bit convoluted, however. You see, in 2021, the National Marine Fisheries Service, NMFS, decided to seasonally close portions of federal waters to lobstering, but left off sections of Massachusetts. The seasonal closings were due to the migration season of the whales between February and April. So in May 2024, there was an appeal entered by the Conservation Law Foundation, Defenders of Wildlife, and the Whale and Dolphin Conservation to reinstate the restrictions in the area off of Massachusetts. I think this had several different rulings, but the latest one comes from the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston, who decided to overturn a district court ruling and reinstate the restrictions. Wow. Both the Maine and Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association are evaluating their next move. In the meantime, the right whales continue to be under extreme threat. Let's shift gears a bit and talk a little bit about new dive equipment. On February 12th, Garmin announced the release of the Garmin Descent G2. It's an all-in-one dive computer and smartwatch. Now, this is an upgrade from the Descent G1, and the biggest change, I think, is the new display. The G2 adds that bright AMOLED display for easy reading at any depth. As a dive computer, you get all the features and functions that you would expect, but if you're looking for air integration, I'm pretty sure the G2 doesn't have that capability, but it does have the built-in compass. A lot of folks like the fact that this is also a smartwatch and gives you the suite of Garmin Health, Fitness, and connected apps. The G2 has two color options. There's the all black with black band or something called Paloma with a pink shell band. Now you can customize the bands if you like also. This new offering uses recycled ocean-bound plastic. While they do advertise a battery life of up to 10 days, it really varies based on how you use the watch. It does state that it uses a Garmin proprietary clip for recharging. Now, the Garmin Descent G2 is priced at $699.99, so $700. You can check it out on their website at garmin.com. And finally, the scuba industry has always had challenges articulating the economic value that it brings. That's a problem with us being such a very niche industry. We continue to tackle the issue, but recently there was a study published in Scientific Reports on February 11th that looked at the value of dive tourism in marine protected areas, or MPAs. The study was led by Ronel Cabral from James Cook University in Australia. Because highly protected marine areas result in increases in biomass and diversity, they attract divers, snorkelers, whale watchers, and others who spend money locally. Now, this is a fairly exhaustive study, but the bottom line is that if all unprotected dive sites were designated as marine protected areas, which accounts for less than 1% of the global oceans, the study concluded that it would generate an additional $2 billion US. Now that sounds like a win-win. Good for the environment and good for the economy. Yes, the world needs more scuba divers. Well, that's it for this installment of Sea State here on the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast. Okay, last year I decided that I would try to limit the amount of time I spent watching the news on television or scrolling through news feeds. There was just too much rhetoric and noise, and it wasn't helping me. But with the new year and the new administration, it's hard to avoid the barrage. It seems like every day there's a new executive order that somehow either restricts something or revokes constraints. Well, there was an executive order signed on February 10th, 2025 that I thought was, to say the least, interesting. It is titled, Ending Procurement and Forced Use of Paper Straws. The executive order labels the paper straws as non-functional, posing a chemical risk, being more expensive to produce than plastic straws. They require people to use more than one straw at a time, and they come wrapped in plastic. The executive order further states, therefore, the policy of the United States is to end the use of paper straws. Now, I don't want to debate the functionality of paper straws. I agree that you don't hold up like a plastic straw. But I was surprised to hear the president say that paper straws explode, or that they wouldn't bother sharks munching on them. Wonder if that exploding thing was a TikTok video. So, it must be true. Okay, enough sarcasm. But what the news item on the paper straws ban did spur was for me to take a look back at something I discussed on Scuba Shack Radio in July 2023. In episode 115 of that podcast, I did a segment on the draft national strategy to prevent plastic pollution. Well, guess what? The final strategy to prevent plastic pollution was released in November 2024. Now, where do we go from here? But first, let's go back and understand just how the United States came to develop this national strategy to prevent plastic pollution. The strategy was actually developed under the requirements of the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act of 2020. The bill was introduced in the Senate by Senator Dan Sullivan from Arkansas. Just for the record, he's a Republican senator. That was in June of 2019. And Senator Chris Murphy from our state of Connecticut was one of the original co-sponsors. Our other senator, Richard Blumenthal, signed on in July. It had 19 co-sponsors in the Senate, 12 Democrats, 6 Republicans, and 1 independent. The bill was signed into law by President Trump on December 18, 2020. Now, if you think back, there was a lot going on back then with the results of the 2020 election. There was a great deal of uncertainty on how the transition to the Biden administration would take place. But even with all that going on, this bill was signed by the president. The Save Our Seas Act was enacted to establish requirements and incentives to reduce, recycle, and prevent marine debris, specifically plastic waste. There are 3 main sections of the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act, including combating marine debris, enhancing global engagement to combat marine debris, and improve domestic infrastructure to prevent marine debris. Now, I'm not going to go into the details within each section, but it is in Section 3, improving domestic infrastructure to prevent marine debris, that requires a strategy. Specifically in Section 301, the EPA must develop a strategy to improve post-consumer materials and infrastructure for the purpose of reducing plastic waste and other post-consumer materials in waterways and oceans. The Act further indicates that the EPA must then publish and distribute it to the states. So here we are, over 4 years later, after a draft strategy released in 2023 received over 92,000 public comments that closed in July of 2023. We have the strategy. Now, the strategy to prevent plastic pollution is part 3 of a series on building a circular economy. Just to close the loop, the other parts are a national recycle strategy released in November 2021 and a national strategy for reducing food loss and waste and recycling organics, and that was published in June of 2024. I want to quickly review the 6 main objectives of the strategy on plastic pollution. They are A, reduce pollution from plastic products, B, innovate materials and product design, C, decreased waste generation, D, improve waste management, E, improve capture and removal of plastic pollution, and F, minimize loadings and impact to waterways and the ocean. Now, there's a lot of detail on just how we intended to execute on the strategy and achieve the objectives. I said intended because things change. When taking a look at the next steps, the strategy summarizes them this way. Implementation of this strategy is expected to be an iterative process as resources, entities leading efforts, and needs change over time. EPA will continue to enable and implement this strategy and EPA-specific opportunities for action in the White House's Mobilizing Federal Action on Plastic Pollution Progress Principles and Priorities, using both voluntary efforts and regulatory approaches where appropriate. Now, the link to the White House's Mobilizing Federal Action on Plastic Pollution is no longer valid. The details of the next steps call for the EPA to do a lot of things and also calls for a lot of funding. Given the current situation as it relates to government employees and cutting programs, I'm not too sure how the EPA will fare and whether they'll have the resources to implement the national strategy to prevent plastic pollution. Last time on the podcast, I talked about the January 20th executive order, putting America first in international agreements, and in that, the president indicated that our country has values in pursuit of our economic and environmental objectives. Does the Save Our Seas Act 2.0 of 2020 reflect those values? I sure hope they do, because our seas certainly do need saving, especially saving from the negative impacts of plastic pollution. So I don't really know where we are headed in the United States with respect to environmental issues like plastic pollution, but it sure doesn't seem like it's the direction I would take. And I'm just not sure how you can ignore that this is a problem. Well, that wraps up this latest episode of the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast. Thanks for listening, and please subscribe to stay up to date with more. Bye for now. This has been the Scuba Educational Alliance Ocean Podcast, a show dedicated to the world of scuba diving, ocean health, sustainability, and fostering a new generation of ocean stewards through diving education. Talk to you again real soon.